Which archetype is running your life? Right now, there is a form of imbalance that is almost invisible because from the outside, your life can look completely stable. You are functioning. You are thinking clearly. You are making decisions. You are doing what needs to be done. And yet, there is a quiet friction underneath. A subtle sense that something is not fully aligned, not dramatically wrong, not chaotic, but slightly displaced. And what makes this difficult to recognize is that it does not come from a lack of effort. Most of the time, it comes from an overexpression of one inner movement. Ancient systems did not describe this in terms of personality. They described it as structure. In the framework of the tree of life, human experience is understood as a dynamic relationship between forces, not fixed traits, not labels, but movements, expansion that opens, limitation that defines, understanding that organizes, expression that brings things into the world, integration that creates coherence. And when one of these movements becomes dominant, it does not feel extreme, it feels like you. That is the difficulty, because imbalance, when it stabilizes, becomes identity. So the question is not, who am I? The more precise question is, which force has become so dominant that I no longer question it? And this is where archetypes become useful, not as personality types, but as patterns of movement that temporarily take the lead in your system. There are 4 of these patterns that often become dominant, especially in intelligent, sensitive minds. The first is the expander. This is the movement toward openness, toward life, toward possibility. It is the part of you that wants to engage, to explore, to say yes. In Kabbalah, this corresponds to Chesed, the principle of expansion, generosity, and outward movement. In balance, this creates warmth, connection, opportunity. But when this movement becomes dominant, it loses its boundary. And without boundary, expansion does not feel like growth. It feels like overflow. You might notice this in very ordinary moments. Opening your phone in the morning and immediately entering multiple conversations, saying yes to a plan before checking how your body actually feels, starting a new idea while 3 others are still unfinished. There is a constant sense of moving outward and very little movement. That brings things back in. Over time, this creates a specific kind of exhaustion, not from doing too much physically, but from holding too much mentally. Because everything stays open, the expander trusts movement, but it does not create closure. So if this is the dominant force in your system, the correction is not productivity. It is containment, which means finishing one thing before opening the next, ending conversations consciously, creating small moments of closure during the day, not as restriction, but as structure, because expansion without containment cannot stabilize. The second archetypal movement is the controller. This is the movement toward precision, toward order, toward predictability. In the tree of life, this aligns with Gevura, the principle of limitation, boundary, and form. In balance, this creates clarity. It gives your life structure. It makes things workable. But when it becomes dominant, it begins to contract too much. You might notice this, not in obvious rigidity, but in subtle tension, planning your day in detail, and still feeling slightly on edge, rehearsing conversations internally before they even happen, trying to make the right decision instead of allowing a good one. The controller does not trust emergence, it trusts precision, and precision always comes with a certain amount of pressure. Over time, this creates a system that is highly organized, but not at ease. So if this is the dominant force, the correction is not less structure, it is flexible structure, which means leaving small spaces unplanned, allowing conversations to unfold naturally, making decisions without optimizing every variable. Because structure without flexibility becomes tension. The third movement is the seeker. This is the movement toward understanding, toward meaning, toward deeper coherence. In Kabbalah, this relates to Bina, the principle of deep comprehension, pattern recognition, and inner structure. This is the force that allows you to see connections, to understand systems, to make sense of complexity. It is often what draws people to symbolic frameworks, to archetypes, to deeper models of reality. But when this movement becomes dominant, it creates a very specific loop. You are always close to clarity, but never fully inside it. There is always another layer, another explanation, another refinement, and your life becomes centered around insight rather than application. You might notice this as saving ideas without implementing them, moving from one framework to another, feeling like you understand everything, but still not feeling stable. The seeker believes that understanding will eventually resolve everything. But understanding without embodiment remains incomplete. So if this is the dominant force, the correction is not more insight. It is integration through action, which means taking one concept and applying it consistently for a set period of time, without adding more input, because clarity is not created through accumulation, it is created through lived structure. The fourth movement is the avoider. This is the movement away from intensity, away from complexity, toward reduction at first glance. This can look like regulation, but when it becomes dominant, it leads to withdrawal. You might notice this in very subtle ways, delaying decisions that would move your life forward, reducing contact, not out of intention, but out of fatigue, staying in familiar routines, even when they are no longer supportive. The avoider reduces input, but it also reduces movement, and over time, this creates stagnation, not overwhelm, but a quiet sense of being stuck. In the structure of the tree of life, this is not balance, it is a system that has stopped engaging. So if this is the dominant force, the correction is not protection, it is gentle activation, which means taking one small action that reintroduces movement into your system without overwhelming it, because life requires participation. Now, this is where the deeper structure becomes important. None of these movements are wrong. None of them need to be removed. They are all necessary, but they are not meant to exist in isolation. In Kabbalah, balance is created. Through relationship between forces, expansion is balanced by limitation, understanding is balanced by expression, movement is balanced by integration, and at the center of this system is a unifying principle, often referred to as Tiferet, the point of harmony, not as perfection, but as alignment. This is where different forces are not competing, but coordinating, and this is what creates a life that feels stable from within. So instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" you begin to ask, which movement is overexpressed, and what is needed to bring this back into relationship. And this leads to a very simple but powerful application. For the next 7 days, observe your system through 3 questions. First, where am I expanding beyond my actual capacity? Not where you are busy, but where you are open without limit. Second, where am I creating unnecessary pressure through control? Not where structure is helpful, but where it becomes rigid. Third, where am I avoiding movement that would actually create clarity? Not where rest is needed, but where avoidance replaces engagement. And then, choose one adjustment, not a full reset, not a complete change. Just one precise shift. Close one open loop, release one unnecessary control. Take one small step back into movement, because structure is not created through intensity. It is created through consistent, precise realignment. And over time, this changes something fundamental. Life begins to feel less random, less reactive, and more structured from within. If this way of understanding resonates with you, you can subscribe to this channel. This is a space for people who are not looking for more noise, but for clarity, structure, and depth. And I would genuinely be interested to hear. Not everything, not a full explanation. Just one word. Which archetype is currently running your system?